I remember vividly the moment when Simon and I, newly engaged, found this apartment. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves swirled around us as we walked through the bustling streets. The location was perfect, just close enough to feel the pulse of the city, yet far enough to offer a peaceful retreat. Simon had squeezed my hand, a silent promise of a new beginning, as we looked up at what would soon be our home. For years, this apartment had been a sanctuary. Each room was filled with the subtle traces of our life together, from the soft throw on the couch where we'd snuggle up watching movies, to the little balcony where we'd sip coffee on Sunday mornings. Despite the challenges, including my inability to have children, we created a life rich in shared moments and understanding. Simon had been my rock, assuring me that our love was enough, and together, we could face anything. But that day, as I stood in the kitchen, my mother-in-law's words sliced through the tranquility of our home like a knife. Her tone was as cold as the tile floor beneath my feet, and with every word, the walls seemed to close in on me. The shock was palpable, her words hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of disbelief and betrayal. "Make sure you're out by tomorrow," she said again, as if I were a tenant overdue on rent rather than a member of the family. The sharpness in her voice made my heart sink. It wasn't just her dismissal that stung, it was the realization that the family I had tried so hard to belong to had never really seen me as one of their own. Turning away, I stared out the kitchen window. The garden, once a source of joy and a symbol of my nurturing care, seemed to mock me with its lushness. How ironic, I thought, to be deemed unnecessary in a home I had tended to with such love and dedication. Later, when I confronted Simon, I hoped for some reassurance, some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. But the look in his eyes, a mix of pity and resignation, told a different story. "It's for the best, Anna," he murmured. His words felt distant, a contrast to the warm promises he had once made. It was clear he had chosen his path, and painfully, it was one that no longer included me. As I packed my belongings, each item resonated with memories of a life that was no longer mine. The picture frames that lined the mantel, the books we collected over the years, the cozy blankets that had warmed us during cold nights, all these things felt like fragments of a dream that had shattered suddenly, unexpectedly. With each packed box, I felt both a release and a deepening sorrow. I was leaving behind not just a physical space, but a chapter of my life that I had believed would last forever. The betrayal was not just about being asked to leave, it was about the realization that the familial warmth I had experienced was conditional, that my place in this home was as fragile as the glassware I wrapped carefully in newspaper. Walking through the apartment for the last time, I couldn't help but feel the loss of what I had thought was a shared love and respect. But with each step towards the door, I also felt a growing resolve. Out there, beyond the confines of these walls, was a world full of possibilities. Perhaps it was time to find a place where I truly belonged, free from the shadows of conditional acceptance and false promises. And so, with my bags packed and my heart heavy yet hopeful, I stepped out into the new dawn of my life, the door closing behind me with a quiet finality. Living in a household where the lines of family demarcation were drawn so rigidly left me in a constant state of apprehension. It was a delicate balance. I had to navigate my role within their predefined limits, cautious not to overstep yet eager to belong. Simon's reassurances felt more like placations, gentle nudges to maintain peace rather than affirmations of my rightful place in the family. When I switched to part-time work, I did so with the hope of integrating more smoothly into the family dynamics. It seemed practical to adapt my schedule, allowing me to manage the household chores while still contributing financially. Yet, even with this change, the emotional distance within the home remained palpable. The first few months of marriage, I remember preparing meals with a hopeful heart. I would set the table for 3, only to find myself eating alone night after night. Simon would come home late, tired and preoccupied, while my mother-in-law and Michael would have already retreated to their corners of the apartment, their plates clean and put away. The silence during these solitary dinners echoed loudly, a stark reminder of the invisible barriers that kept me on the periphery of their lives. My attempts to engage with Michael were met with subtle rebuffs. At times, I caught glimpses of curiosity in his eyes, quickly masked by a veil of indifference as soon as our eyes met. It was clear that any relationship with him had to pass through the gatekeeper, his grandmother. Her influence was profound, and her approval seemed necessary for any significant interaction. The day I learned about Michael's school activity was a particularly bitter pill. Eager to be involved, I approached the topic with enthusiasm, only to be met with a firm rebuff from my mother-in-law. "We'll go there, just Simon and me, Anna. You don't need to worry about it," she declared, her voice carrying an undertone of finality that chilled my spirit. Her words, meant to exclude, hung heavily between us, and I felt a profound sense of isolation. That night, when I spoke to Simon about it, his explanation did little to assuage my feelings. "Mom's been clinging to Michael, she probably thinks you're trying to take him away," he explained wearily. His words were meant to be comforting, an insider's insight into his mother's protective nature. Yet, they underscored my outsider status, reinforcing the notion that I was an intruder in what should have been my own family. Simon's promise to talk to her eventually felt hollow. It was always eventually, a time that seemed perpetually just out of reach, a deferred confrontation that never materialized. My role, it seemed, was to be ever patient, always understanding, continually adjusting to accommodate the unspoken rules that governed their familial interactions. Each day, as I walked through the apartment, adjusting cushions and dusting shelves, I reflected on my place within these walls. They were filled with pictures that did not include me, books I had never read, and remnants of a family history in which I had no part. It was a strange limbo, living inside a home that never truly felt like mine, among people who saw my presence as a mere convenience rather than a genuine addition to their lives. The daily torment seemed to increase with each passing day, particularly after Michael moved out. My mother-in-law's presence became even more oppressive, her criticisms more biting. It felt as though, with Michael gone, the buffer that had somewhat diluted her negativity was no longer there, leaving me to bear the brunt of her hostility alone. Each day I returned home from work, the atmosphere was thick with tension. I'd find her sitting at the dining table, her eyes sharp and scrutinizing, as if she were waiting to catch me in a mistake. Her voice, once just cold, now carried a venom that seeped into every corner of our home. "You're really inefficient. At this rate, it'll take you all night," she would snipe as I fumbled through the preparation of our dinner. Cooking had never been my forte, a fact that became painfully apparent once my mother-in-law ceased contributing to any household duties. Each dish I prepared was met with harsh criticism. "This tastes awful," she'd declare after a mere taste, her face twisted in disgust. "I'm sorry, I'm trying my best," I'd respond, trying to keep my voice steady despite the frustration welling up inside me. "You're astonishingly tone-deaf when it comes to flavors, Anna," she would continue, each word a hammer driving the wedge deeper between us. "It's a good thing Michael never had to eat this. How terrible." Such comments made it clear, her goal wasn't to encourage improvement but to belittle and demean. As the days turned into weeks, the criticisms extended beyond the kitchen. "Why are there so many wrinkles in the laundry? You have to vacuum every nook and cranny. You really can't do anything right," she would complain. Every attempt I made to maintain the home was met with disparagement, as if my very efforts were an affront to her standards. One particularly difficult evening, as I struggled with a stubborn stain on one of the tablecloths, she watched me with a look of sheer disdain. "Didn't your family teach you anything?" she sighed dramatically, shaking her head. The insinuation that even my upbringing was deficient was a blow that struck deeper than I had anticipated. It was then that I realized there was nothing I could do to win her approval. Her mind was set against me from the start. The constant belittlement about my capabilities as a housekeeper soon merged into personal attacks on my character. "I don't know how you won over Simon, but I can't see much charm in you as a woman," she would conclude, her words slicing through the last vestiges of my patience. And always, she would circle back to the same painful refrain, "If you hadn't come, Michael would have never left." Living with such constant criticism, with the air always heavy with disapproval and scorn, I found myself shrinking smaller each day. My confidence, once bolstered by Simon's love and support, now felt like a distant memory, eroded by the relentless tide of my mother-in-law's contempt. Each night, as I lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, I wondered how long I could endure this life, feeling more like an unwelcome guest in my own home than a wife and a member of the family. The glare my mother-in-law bestowed upon me in that moment felt as cold and piercing as ever, but it also carried a new intensity, a sort of desperation tinged with accusation. Her excitement over the impending arrival of her great-grandchild had rekindled a spark in her that I hadn't seen in years, yet it also seemed to amplify her disdain towards me. Her happiness was shadowed by an undertone of bitterness whenever our paths crossed. "I just thought Sarah might want to pick things out herself," I reiterated, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising tension. My suggestion was logical, I believed, respectful of Sarah's role as the mother-to-be. I wanted to ensure she felt involved and central to the preparations, a courtesy I had seldom felt in my own interactions with the family. "How can you be so cold? It's Simon's grandchild." "Oh, that's right, you're not related to Michael by blood. You don't care, do you?" The words stung, not just because of their cruelty, but because they touched a nerve deep within me. The accusation of being uncaring was unjust and hurtful, especially considering the countless times I had tried to show my love and support for the family, often setting aside my own feelings in the process. "That's not true," I protested softly, feeling the weight of her judgment. "Please don't say that." My plea was earnest, born from years of trying to bridge the gap between us, only to find it widening with every effort I made. The preparations for the baby's arrival continued at a frenzied pace. Every day, new items filled the house: cribs, baby clothes, toys, all chosen with care by my mother-in-law. Her energy was boundless when it came to anything related to Michael's future child. She would spend hours discussing plans over the phone with Michael, laughing and sharing stories, a side of her I had rarely been privy to. I was tasked with the physical labor, cleaning, organizing, waxing floors, tasks that left me physically exhausted and emotionally drained. Each instruction from my mother-in-law felt like an indirect reminder of my outsider status. "Anna, I vacuumed Michael's room, so you need to wipe the floors and the windows, and please wax them too." The tasks were delivered as commands, not requests, and I dutifully complied, trying to prove my worth and my commitment to the family. The financial demands were another layer of stress. "Anna, I need you to withdraw some money tomorrow. There are things I want to get ready for the baby." The requests for money were frequent and often substantial, with little consideration for our budget or financial plans. Each time, I felt a pang of resentment, quickly suppressed, as I reminded myself that this was for Simon's grandchild, a connection that was meant to be important to me as well. Yet, with each passing day, I felt more like an instrument in my mother-in-law's grand plan, rather than a valued member of the family. My attempts to participate in the decisions were brushed aside, my concerns dismissed. It was clear that in her eyes, I was there to facilitate her desires, not to have any real input or connection. The excitement she felt for the future was a stark contrast to the growing desolation I felt, as I navigated the complexities of a family dynamic that continuously excluded and undermined me. "We don't need another mother figure anymore, you've been redundant for a while now," she continued, her words cutting deeper with each syllable. "Michael and his family will be living here, so make sure you're out by tomorrow." The finality in her voice left no room for negotiation, and the shock of her demand rendered me speechless. The abruptness of the ultimatum jolted me out of the reflective state I had been in since our argument the previous day. There I was, trying to manage the complexities of our household finances, attempting to secure a stable future for all of us, only to be dismissed as redundant, an extra piece in the familial puzzle that no longer fit. As I stood there, the enormity of what was happening began to sink in. For years, I had navigated the delicate balance of being both a supportive wife and a dutiful daughter-in-law, often at the expense of my own comfort and happiness. I had adjusted to the harsh realities of living with a woman who saw me more as an intruder than as family. But this, being asked to leave my own home with such coldness, was something I had never imagined would happen. "Yes, we don't need another mother figure anymore. You've been redundant for a while now," she repeated, as if to cement my ousted status. Her gaze was steely, her posture rigid, a clear signal that her decision was not up for discussion. The return of her eldest son and his wife was clearly a much-awaited event, one that somehow necessitated my exclusion. Confusion and hurt swirled within me as I tried to grasp the full implications of her words. "I have to leave?" I echoed, my voice a mix of disbelief and panic. I had invested years into making this house a home, not just for Simon and me, but for any family member who walked through its doors. And yet, in a matter of moments, I was being erased from the picture, deemed unnecessary and undesirable. The reality that I was no longer welcome in what I had considered my safe haven hit me hard. As I looked around at the familiar surroundings, the memories of better times seemed to mock my current predicament. Every room held echoes of laughter, shared meals, and quiet evenings, all the minutiae that make up a shared life. Now, I was being stripped of my place in this world, ousted with as much thought as one might give to an outdated piece of furniture. Stunned, I felt my resolve hardening. If this was how little I meant to the family after all these years, perhaps it was time to reevaluate where I stood. The hurt was overwhelming, but beneath it, a spark of defiance flickered to life. I was being forced out, yes, but I was not going to leave as a victim. I needed to find my dignity, gather my strength, and face this new chapter on my own terms. Still, as I packed my belongings, each item resonated with the weight of the years I had spent building a life I thought was secure. The task was both physically and emotionally draining, a tangible dismantling of a life I would soon be leaving behind. As I zipped up the last suitcase, I realized that the path forward was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. With a deep breath, I prepared to step out into an unknown future, carrying both the pain of departure and the hope of new beginnings. Sitting at the bar, the familiarity of the tavern enveloped me like a warm blanket. It was strange, this mix of nostalgia and current turmoil. As the owner walked away to prepare my order, I stared at the phone in my hand, the picture on the screensaver, a happier time that now seemed like another life. The buzz of the tavern, the clinking of glasses, and the low murmur of conversations around me created a semblance of normalcy, yet inside, my world was falling apart. The thought that Simon might be with someone else was devastating. How had things changed so drastically? Was I so blind to the signs, or had I simply chosen to ignore them, wrapped up in the facade of a happy family life? I sipped the beer as soon as it arrived, the cool bitterness of it grounding me momentarily. The mixed plate of grilled chicken was set in front of me soon after, its familiar aroma bringing back a flood of memories. Simon and I used to share this dish, often debating over the last piece of chicken. It was one of those simple, silly things that couples find comfort in. Now, sitting alone with the same plate in front of me, the solitude was stark. "Hey, it's been about 8 years," the tavern owner commented as he placed the plate down, his tone a mixture of surprise and nostalgia. "I remember you used to come here a lot with your husband." "Yes, it's been a while," I replied, forcing a smile. His recognition added a layer of comfort, reminding me that once, I was part of a we, not just the isolated I that I felt now. "Everything okay?" he asked, his expression showing a hint of concern. Tavern owners often have a sixth sense about these things. They see all facets of human emotion play out across their bars. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The truth was far from okay, but it was not something I could share, not here, not now. I diverted the conversation back to the food. "It's good to have this again. Brings back good memories." He smiled, understanding the change of subject, and went back to tending to other customers. As I ate, the emotional weight of the day caught up with me. Each bite was mechanical. My mind was racing, parsing through every interaction with Simon over the past months, looking for signs, for clues that I had missed. My mother-in-law's cruel words echoed in my head, amplifying my fears and doubts. After finishing my meal and settling the bill, I stepped out of the tavern into the cool night air. The brief respite had helped, but the hard reality awaited me. I had to confront Simon. I had to know the truth, regardless of how much it might hurt. With a deep breath, I started walking back towards our home, each step heavier than the last, preparing myself for what might come next. My heart was heavy, my future uncertain, but I knew that I couldn't live in the shadow of doubts and maybes. Tonight, I needed answers. It was as if the very act of my leaving was feeding some deep-seated need within her. As the movers carried out the last of the boxes, her eyes followed every movement, her expression unreadable. "I hope this makes you happy," I said, my voice calm but carrying a weight of emotion I struggled to contain. Her only response was a slight nod, as if affirming that this was indeed what she wanted. As the final items were loaded into the moving truck, I walked through the now empty rooms one last time. Each empty space echoed with the remnants of a life I thought I'd built here. Memories flashed through my mind, laughter, dinners, tears, and whispered promises in the dark. It was hard to reconcile those moments with the stark, barren reality of these rooms now. Turning to leave, I felt a strange sense of relief. The oppressive weight of constant scrutiny and criticism was lifting. I was free, in a sense, but the freedom came with its own set of heavy questions about my future. Stepping outside, I faced the moving truck, the physical representation of my new beginning. I had nowhere specific to go yet, but the need to escape the toxic atmosphere of that house overshadowed all else. The driver handed me a clipboard to sign off on the delivery to a storage unit I had arranged the night before. "All set?" he asked, noting my distracted demeanor. "Yes, thank you," I replied, handing back the clipboard. As they drove off, a profound sense of solitude settled over me. I was alone now, truly alone for the first time in many years. The freedom was terrifying, but also exhilarating. With nothing but a small suitcase and my purse, I called a taxi. As I waited, I thought about my next steps. There was no going back, only forward. I decided to first find a hotel, a temporary refuge where I could gather my thoughts and plan my future. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, I realized that this moment, as painful as it was, offered a chance for rebirth. It was an opportunity to redefine who I was outside of the roles I had been confined to as wife and unwanted daughter-in-law. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, fraught with uncertainty and the need to rebuild from scratch. Yet, there was a part of me that felt invigorated by the prospect of starting anew, on my own terms, without anyone to undermine or dictate my worth. As the taxi arrived, I directed the driver to the nearest hotel. Looking back at the house one last time, I felt a chapter closing behind me. Ahead was a blank page, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own story. "Then, good luck with your new family setup," I said, the words heavy but clear. I could hear the confusion in Simon's voice, the realization that his actions, or inactions, had led to this point. "You're really not coming back?" Simon's voice cracked slightly, a mix of bewilderment and desperation seeping through. The background noise suggested that Michael and his family were indeed there, likely unpacking or settling in. "No, Simon. I'm not," I replied firmly. The decisiveness in my tone surprised even me. There was no anger, just a resigned clarity that this chapter of my life was closed. "Your mother made it clear that my presence was no longer required or desired. And honestly, I need to start thinking about my own happiness now." There was a pause on the line, heavy and awkward. "But, Anna, we're a family." Simon. "We were a family," I corrected him gently. "But your family's needs always seem to exclude my own. I've been pushed out, and I have accepted that now. It's time for me to move on." Simon sighed, the sound muffled and distant. "I guess I didn't realize how serious my mother was, or how deep her words cut you." "I'm sorry, Anna. I never meant for any of this to happen." "It's not just about your mother, Simon," I continued, feeling a strange calmness envelop me. "It's about us, or the lack of us. There hasn't been an us in a very long time." Your silence spoke as loudly as your mother's words. I could hear him struggling to find the right words, the awkwardness palpable even through the phone. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. "I'm staying with a friend for now, and after that, I'll find a place of my own. I have my job, and I have plans, none of which need to involve this house or those who wish I wasn't part of it." My voice was steady, my resolve firm. And what about us? Is there no chance? He trailed off, unable to finish. Simon, you need to focus on Michael and his family now. That's what's important, right? I'll be fine. I've made peace with this. Maybe one day, you'll understand why this had to happen. Ending the call, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. Despite the initial pain and the tumult of emotions, I was now free from the constraints and expectations that had silently choked me for years. It was a freedom born of necessity, of a desperate need to reclaim my own life and identity. As I looked around my temporary room at my friend's place, a sense of possibility began to take root. Yes, the future was uncertain and undoubtedly there would be challenges, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to shape. A life free from the shadows of disdain and dismissal, a life where I could perhaps find what truly made me happy. Expenses has always been something Simon handled, Sarah interjected, her voice tinged with disbelief and a hint of panic. We were under the impression that staying here wouldn't add to our financial burdens. Things have changed, Sarah, I said calmly, turning to face her directly. The financial dynamics of this household are not what you might have been led to believe. I've been bearing the cost of the rent and a significant portion of the living expenses for the last 5 years. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Michael's face contorted with confusion and frustration, clearly struggling to reconcile this new information with his previous understanding. My mother-in-law sat stunned, her earlier aggressive demeanor replaced by a look of bewilderment. She glanced between Simon and me, perhaps finally grasping the extent of the financial deception. I thought Simon was covering everything. This is why you've been working so much? Michael finally asked, his tone a mixture of anger and confusion, directed more at Simon than at me. Yes, Simon finally spoke up, his voice low. The company has been struggling, and I didn't want anyone to worry. I wanted to maintain our lifestyle, to keep everything running smoothly without burdening anyone with the reality of our financial situation. And so, I stepped in, I continued, feeling a need to clarify the full extent of the circumstances. I didn't mind at first, because I thought we were all in this together, as a family. But it seems that's not how things have played out. My mother-in-law, usually so quick to dominate any conversation, remained silent, absorbing the shock of these revelations. It was clear that the image of her son as the sole provider had been deeply ingrained in her perception of our family dynamics. Now, with me moving out, I'm no longer able to cover these costs, I added, addressing Michael directly. It's only fair that you take on the responsibility, especially since you'll be living here. But $5,600 is that's too much. Sarah exclaimed. We can't afford that on our part-time jobs. Wasn't the plan always for us to move back here so we could save money while starting our family? The plan changed when I was told my presence here was redundant, I said firmly. I've made my contributions over the years, far beyond what was fair or expected. Now, it's your turn to figure things out. I'm sure you can understand, especially with a child on the way. Michael looked deflated, his earlier bravado evaporated as the reality of the situation settled in. He glanced at Simon, who avoided his gaze, and then at his grandmother, who still seemed to be in shock. I'll leave you all to discuss this, I said, standing up from the chair. I came back to clarify things and to ensure there's no misunderstanding about my departure and the reasons behind it. As I turned to leave, a mix of emotions coursed through me. There was relief at having spoken my truth, sadness for what had once been, and a resolute sense of closure. I had done what I needed to do, said what needed to be said, and now it was time for me to step away completely. Leaving the house, I felt the chapter fully close behind me, a definitive end to a long and tumultuous saga. Ahead lay a path unburdened by the weight of those complications, a future where I could finally focus on myself and my own needs without apology or explanation. You've always been selfish, only thinking about yourself, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. I met her glare with a calm, steady gaze. Over the years, I had learned that reacting to her outbursts only fueled her anger more. No, I replied, my voice even but firm. I have always tried to be a part of this family, to support Simon and to make this home a better place for everyone. But it seems that no matter what I did, it was never enough for you." Her face reddened, and she seemed to be searching for a retort, but none came. Instead, she huffed and turned away, her body language screaming of defeat yet unwilling to admit it. This was perhaps the first time I had truly stood up to her without holding back, and it felt both liberating and deeply sad. Turning back to Simon, I saw a man caught between his mother and his wife, his face etched with confusion and regret. "Simon," I began, my voice softer now. "I have loved you, and part of me always will. But this," I gestured around to the tense faces and the cold, unforgiving walls of the house that never truly felt like home, "this isn't love. It's survival. And I won't survive like this anymore." Simon's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had promised to stand by me through thick and thin. But that man had been swallowed up by complacency and the fear of confronting his mother. "Anna, He started, but no other words followed. "It's okay, Simon," I said, cutting off his stammering attempt at reconciliation. "You don't need to say anything. Just take care of your family, your real family." The words stung as I said them, but they needed to be said, for both our sakes. I turned then, picking up my bag. My mother-in-law was still simmering in her seat, her eyes boring into my back, but I felt nothing now. No anger, no resentment. Just a profound sense of relief that it was finally over. As I walked to the door, I didn't look back. I knew that if I did, it might break the fragile composure I was holding onto. Outside, the air was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere I had left behind. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs and cleanse the last remnants of that toxic environment from my system. Walking away, I realized I was stepping not just away from a house or a failed marriage, but from an old version of myself. A version that had tried too hard to be accepted, to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. Ahead was uncertainty, of course, but there was also freedom, the freedom to rediscover who I was, who I could be, unencumbered by the expectations and judgments of others. And as I walked down the street, the weight of the past years began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. After everything that happened, it feels refreshing to start anew. I've settled into my new apartment, a cozy place with just enough space for me and my essentials. It's quiet here, devoid of the constant tension and drama that had pervaded my previous residence. The simplicity of my new surroundings has given me a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I was missing. The furniture and appliances from my old life, reminders of a time and a person I was trying to move past, felt out of place in this new chapter. Disposing of them wasn't just a physical act of clearing space, it was symbolic, too, a way of letting go of the past and all the heavy emotions tied to it. Now, my living space is filled only with items that serve my current life, each one chosen carefully to reflect and support my new beginning. Work has been a sanctuary, too. Returning to my full-time role as a pharmacist has rekindled a passion for my profession that I'd nearly forgotten under the weight of my marital issues. Every day offers a new opportunity to help others, providing a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been dulled by personal strife. I've reconnected with old friends and made some new ones, people who know me as just Anna, not as someone's estranged wife or the unwanted daughter-in-law. It's liberating to be seen for who I am, not for the roles I was forced into. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, are a stark contrast to the forced interactions of my former life. As for Michael, his apology letter was a bittersweet reminder of what might have been. It's painful to think about the years lost to misunderstandings and manipulations, about all the moments we could have shared as a family if things had been different. His acknowledgement of his desires as a child and his regrets about how things turned out between us stirred a mix of sadness and hope within me. Sadness for the past, but hope that he finds his way to happiness, perhaps breaking the cycle of control and resentment that marred our relationship. While part of me wonders if reaching out more could have changed our dynamic, I know that dwelling on these what-ifs serves little purpose. The apology, however, has helped in healing old wounds, offering closure to a chapter that desperately needed to be closed. Living for my own happiness has become my new mantra. For so long, my life revolved around pleasing others, fitting into molds that were never meant for me. Now, I focus on what brings me joy, peace, and satisfaction. Whether it's enjoying a quiet evening with a good book, taking a long walk in the park, or simply indulging in my hobbies, each day is a step in my journey of self-discovery and personal growth. This period of tranquility has been a profound teacher. It's taught me about resilience, about the importance of setting boundaries, and about the incredible strength that comes from choosing to rise above difficult circumstances. Looking forward, I'm excited about the possibilities that lie ahead, eager to embrace life's experiences with a heart that's lighter and a spirit that's